Welcome to the Astro Psyche. Today we are going to talk about planetary returns and anniversaries. And planetary return is really just that, an anniversary of a planet returning back to a place where it was, either the place where it was in your birth chart or in the sky at some point in time, in the zodiac at some point in time. And I wanted to share this with you today as next month I am approaching the 11th anniversary of being an astrologer for 11 years, which sounds really surreal and wild to me to even think about. And this is also my 600th video on YouTube, which is also very surreal to think about. And I feel that anniversaries are so important. And as astrologers, as astrology enthusiasts, we're constantly tracking cycles and anniversaries. Anytime there is a return or a conjunction, we could think of that as an anniversary and as a simultaneous beginning and ending. And in my work as a psychotherapist, I also have learned over time how impactful anniversaries are. That whether the anniversary is something that we're celebrating or something that we're grieving, um, there's often feelings that come up that are um, maybe we're aware that the feelings are coming up, or maybe they're more unconscious, and we sort of are thinking, oh, why am I feeling this way? And then we realize that an anniversary is approaching or an anniversary is here. And so, even unconsciously, there is this imprint, there is this psychic unconscious connection to the events that we've experienced. And so it can be helpful for us to understand what we're feeling when we look at planetary returns and anniversaries. And it can also help us understand the context as well. So even if we're not in a planetary return right now, we can look back, we can look forward to understand the context of the cycle that we're in, the multitude of cycles that we're in. So excited to explore this with you. My name is Shawna McGrath. I'm a depth psychotherapist and an astrologer, and it's such an honor to share these ideas, the astrology and life from a depth psychological perspective with you. Okay, so yes, I wanted to just, yeah, really name that next month, October, is the 11-year anniversary of becoming an astrologer. Um, that is also the year that I started making videos on YouTube, and it again is just very surreal. Many of my videos are weekly forecasts, but many are also videos like this where I share things that I'm interested in, that I'm excited about, and it feels very special to me to have the ability to share with you and to explore the things that are my special interests that I'm excited about, and to also do so in a way that hopefully adds to your growth and healing process in some way. Um, so I also too, so there's sort of a smattering of things that I want to say here that came up when I was thinking about this. Um, it feels a bit vulnerable for me to even say this is when I became an astrologer, because in some ways, that is an arbitrary definition, and one may say, well, how do we even say when someone is or is not an astrologer? And um, I think that Chris Brennan on the astrology podcast has maybe done an entire episode dedicated to that question how we would define when someone is an astrologer. What does that mean? Does that mean that they are doing readings or consultations for someone? Does that mean that they are getting paid for that or not paid for that? Does that mean they're seeing a certain number of clients every month or every week? Does that mean that they're researching astrology, et cetera, et cetera? And the way that I am defining it today in this moment is that an astrologer is someone who studies astrology and reads charts, whether that is for their own um, personal practice that is private, or that's something that they do for family or friends, or that's something that they do professionally. I think that astrology is such a personal practice, and at the end of the day, it is a symbolic language, and anyone can speak that. Anyone can do that, and so there's a variety of different ways that that can look. Um, as far as marking an anniversary for myself, that for me felt important because there was a point in time, 11 years ago almost now, in October of 2014, when I got one of my first astrology readings. And in that reading, among other things, I received some encouragement to pursue astrology more seriously. And it was just the very most subtle, slight encouragement, but I really ran with it and decided to start reading charts for people who I didn't know for the first time. So, first time that I decided to start reading charts for folks who were not friends or family. And I found it so exciting to give readings, to give astrology consultations. And there was something about getting that encouragement and then also getting really excited and saying, okay, I'm going to do this. There was something about that that felt very empowering for me. And so that is a part of why I am saying that is the anniversary, the moment of becoming. And I think that it may look different for everyone depending on what your exposure and experience is. And um, now when I read a chart, when I sit in session with a client, whether that is doing an astrological consultation or psychotherapy where we're bringing astrology into the room, I still find it so incredibly exciting and special because the astrology is this, again, this symbolic language that is so personal to each individual person and also to each unique individual moment. And um, yeah, just really feel so honored to continue to do this work and looking forward to continuing to be an astrologer and do this work for many years to come. Um, okay, so let's see. What else did I want to share with you? I also wanted to talk to you about planetary returns because I want us to be conceptualizing returns within a wider context. I want us to be thinking about returns not merely as one event that happens in a static vacuum, but a return is a part of a broader cycle. And also that there are multiple returns that we're working through, that we're experiencing. There's multiple cycles that are running at any one time. And this is really what we're looking at when we look at transits. We're looking at an image of the multitude of cycles that are happening. And so, um, Each planet has a different timing. Some planetary timings are more broad and long term. Those ones tend to have a deeper impact, but it happens more slowly over time. Some are more short term. So, um, I want to run through some of the planetary returns that we experience from time to time and compare and contrast. So, some planets we don't have a return. So, for example, Pluto has a a path through the zodiac that lasts about 250 years. That's a long time. So, until humans are living past 250 years, we're not going to have a Pluto return. A country can have a Pluto return, but a person cannot. And so, for most of us, we're really tracking Saturn inward. Saturn returns are very important because there's so much about the structure of our lives, our integrity, our responsibilities, the things that we are creating more confidence and a sense of inner mastery around. This is Saturn. And so we will typically in a lifetime have 3 Saturn returns. So Saturn takes about 30-ish years to go through the zodiac, and so its return time period is about 30 years at a time. So we'll have a Saturn return when we're in our late 20s to early 30s. We'll have one again when we're in our late 50s to early 60s, and then again when we're in our early 80s. And Saturn returns again because the planet is slow. The the time period is longer of the actual return. So Saturn returns typically last about 3 years or so. So it's this arc of time where there is this returning. And I want us to think about the return as like reconnecting. The return is reconnecting, remembering, coming back to something that is inside of you when we're talking about a return to your birth chart placement. And so it's really interesting because the birth chart is always there. It's you were born, this is the moment, the place, the time that you were born. We have this chart, which is a visual, living symbol that is always existing. And it's not changing, but you're changing. You're having experiences, interactions, you're having life experience, and also the transits, the planets as they are in the sky moment by moment after you're born, they're moving around the chart, so to speak. And so the transiting planets are activating your birth chart planets. We could think of it that way. And so when there's a planetary return, the planet that is returning, let's say in this case it's Saturn, that planet becomes more important. Its symbolic archetypal themes become more present, become more expressive in your life. They become more on your mind, more in your life. And because planetary archetypes and planetary symbols are so there's such a wide variety of ways in which it could manifest. It's often very difficult to predict exactly what we're going to be feeling and thinking, but we can get a sense for the theme, the archetypal tone, the vibe, some of the things that may come up, and we can particularly get a sense for that when we look at what has been happening leading up to that return. We can also get a sense for just really looking at that planet and its placement in your birth chart because the return is returning to you. It's returning to the origin point of the energy that you were born with. And so for Saturn, this is returning into the structure of your life, your commitments, your responsibilities. And from this depth psychological perspective, we're looking at Saturn as a symbol of the things that your psyche wants to master, that your psyche wants to build. Saturn in the birth chart is also this symbol of having a sense of self confidence, growing through experience. So, Saturn is interesting because many times, wherever it is in the chart, that's a place where maybe we feel um, that we have to put in more effort. And it can often be so. I, I hear this a lot. It's like, oh, like, you know, why is it like this thing? It's so hard. Like, why is it so hard for me? But so and so or so and so, it seems to be effortless for them. And this often, we often feel Saturn when we're talking about it that way. It's like Saturn, not that Saturn has to indicate where something is hard, but Saturn usually indicates where our rigorous attention is required to whatever the subject is. And when we put our attention there and we put our integrity and our ethics and our stamina, our devotion, we put our devotion into that place, oftentimes that is a place where we become wise, confident, skilled. There's a sense of mastery that develops because it has to, because we're sort of, for whatever reason, required almost. There's this feeling of feeling required to put your energy there. And so, again, Saturn is always there in the chart. So these themes are possibly in your life always there, but they become more forward focus during a Saturn return time period. And Saturn return also is really important because we can look back at when a Saturn return was, and we can look at, okay, what was happening during that 3-ish year time period? What important structural changes, responsibilities, requirements, commitments, what kind of things around commitments, responsibilities, etc., were happening? What was being asked of you? How were you being asked to show up? How did you show up? What was sustainable for you versus not sustainable? That's a big Saturn question. And we can understand that those things were sort of foundational, and that moving forward, we're constantly um, we're constantly drawing back into that energy. And Saturn in particular has a 7-year cycle. So we have our Saturn return. 7 years after that, Saturn will square its return position. 7 years after that, it will oppose its return position. And then 7 years after that, it will make another square. 7 years after that, it will return again. And then we're back into the 30-year cycle, the ending and beginning. And so we are, when we're at any point and we're having a Saturn transit, we can also look to the Saturn return to understand how to work with this energy. And so um, I think this is also why the returns are important. Even if we're not going through a return, we can look to a return as this concentrated experience of the astrology and the archetypal themes in our life. Now, I want to talk about Jupiter return. And I'm wondering, if there's other, take a moment, take a pause, what comes up for you as you're hearing this. Actually, I feel like there's like one little other thing maybe that I want to say here about Saturn. So, Saturn return happens 3 times in our lifetime. And in some ways, that can feel like a bit of pressure. I think like you only get three. um, but I want to tell you that there is a sacredness about that time, any time period, really, honestly. There's always a sacredness. And also with Saturn return, we're always trying to do the best that we can at any given moment. And when we are in the midst of a Saturn return, we are still doing our best. And it may feel like there are things that are outside of our preferences, or maybe things are a little bit more difficult. And I think that Saturn is about working within what we have at our disposal and doing things. So, like working within the limitations that we have and doing the best that we can so that we feel that we are within our ethics and our integrity and that we are building a life for ourselves that we can feel confident and proud of. And that, as with any transit, particularly Saturn transits and the outer planets as well, we often don't know exactly what's happening until we get a little space from it. So, this is why astrology is so helpful because we can open up the symbols and we can look at it, talk about it, we can muse on it, we can reflect, and it helps us understand what's happening now. And also, there's some element of it that when we're in it, we can't fully see everything. And so, I think this is also what's really cool about the Saturn cycles is the more space we get away from a return, the more that we can understand what was happening there. And the more that we reflect on the Saturn return time periods, we can really connect with our sense of confidence and connect with our sense of mastery and um, also do any grief work that we need to do around what may have occurred during that time. Okay, so other returns that happen. So after Saturn, Jupiter is the next in line as far as speed. So Jupiter takes about 12 years to go around the zodiac. So that means we have our Jupiter return every 12 years. So 12 years old, we have a Jupiter return. 24 years old, we have a Jupiter return, et cetera, et cetera. And Jupiter returns are this returning to our capacity for hope, optimism, growth, expansion, exploration, and also being open, being open to saying yes, to asking for help, to receiving support, to exploring. Jupiter is so much about exploration. And um, Jupiter and Saturn are an important complementary pair because Saturn creates structure, containment, intention, devotion. And then Jupiter creates the hope, the inspiration, and the expansion. And so together they create uh, this perfect sense of pressure and then pushing against that pressure and moving out. And so when we have a Jupiter return, it's really important because it helps us to connect in with our capacity for hope and growth and optimism. And wherever Jupiter is in the chart, so when I say that, I mean the house where Jupiter is placed in your birth chart, the sign that it's in, the planet that that sign rules, the other planets that Jupiter is aspecting. These are all indicators of the areas of life and the kinds of things that are expansive and growth inducing and hope inducing for you. It's very important to feel um, this enthusiasm for life, and Jupiter reminds us of that. And for each of us that's going to be a bit different. It's going to show up differently. And so the Jupiter return is also this marker of an expansion point and a marker of the things that help us to become more open, to become more curious, and to have a wider perspective of the world. Jupiter's connected to philosophy, spirituality, religion, exploring other cultures, other perspectives that are different than yours, exploring a wide diversity of interests or cultures and things like this. And so Jupiter also in the birth chart points to where we find delight in exploring and helps us to stay connected with a greater sense of purpose and meaning as well. Okay, so also moving more inward in the solar system is Mars. So Mars return happens much more often, typically happens about every 2.5 years or so. And I find Mars returns to be interesting because we often can feel a bit worked up, angry, charged, agitated, or maybe simply energized when we have a Mars return. Mars is a symbol of our physicality. Mars is a symbol of our psychological defense system, the way that we protect ourselves, the way that we set boundaries or say no, or how we go into the fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode. It's also a symbol of the kinds of things that we do in other ways to protect ourselves. Um, and it is a symbol of anger. And anger being this indicator that something is amiss, that something is bothersome or intrusive, or that something is just not sitting with us, right? And so when we have this Mars return, we get this opportunity about every 2.5 years to connect in with our anger and how we say no, how we are direct or indirect. And um, though Mars returns can be a time where we sort of feel a lot of energy that maybe can be angsty or agitating or even frustrating, I think that there is this quality of Mars that can be energizing and reviving that helps us to connect more in with how we actually feel about things. And of course, this is really an opportunity to learn about your natal Mars placement in your birth chart and how you process and hold anger, how you deal with confrontation or conflict, and if there are maybe things that you want to do differently, or maybe there's a scenario in your life that needs some Mars energy, that often will coincide with a Mars return. There's maybe something that's sort of been happening and it's been fine. And now, for whatever reason, it's not fine and it needs to be dealt with. That's sort of the tone of Mars return energy. And um, Mars is so important for us to be able to take care of ourselves. Okay, so also Venus returns happen depending on where Venus is in its cycle and its retrograde process. The Venus return happens anywhere from every 8 months to about every year and a half. And Venus return is this reconnecting in with your capacity for connecting with other people, how you relate with other people, but also how you experience joy and pleasure, what you feel beautiful, what you feel attractive, what feels erotic to you. These are all Venusian themes. Venus is also very connected to our self-expressive creative process. And so when we have a return, it can be a really beautiful time of reconnecting to what you find enjoyable and pleasurable purely for the sake of just enjoying things. Um, it can also be a returning into how you show up in relationship and exploring some interpersonal dynamics, um, rooting back into your values. So it's interesting because I think we don't often think of Venus as being connected to integrity and ethics in the way that Saturn is, but Venus is what we value. Venus is what we find enjoyable. And so every year-ish, when we have a Venus return, we also get to remember what we actually like. Not what is popular or convenient or accessible, but what we actually like and are drawn to, and what helps us to feel alive, what helps us connect with our inner eros, our inner erotic energy. This returning to the place where Venus is, which is the sign, the house placement, etc., that tells us about how you connect in with something that feels beautiful, that's in this flow state, and then that helps you be more open to connecting with other people as well. Okay, so other returns that happen are the Mercury return, which happens about once a year, and then also the solar return, which is your birthday. So, Mercury return is this returning into your capacity for communication, the way you think, the stories that you tell, the patterns of thoughts that run through your mind. And so, this is this more frequent return with it being once a year. And I think it's such a lovely opportunity to return and reflect on how you think about things, how you process information, and to even look at how maybe, so two things actually are coming to my mind right now. Number one is to look at how you want to work with your inner dialogue. Um, Are there things that you want to shift or change? And when I say that, are there thought patterns that maybe are automatic and so ingrained that you want to challenge or question because maybe they're untrue or they're not helpful in some way? Or maybe there are thought patterns or perspectives that you want to cultivate and encourage more. And our placement of Mercury in the birth chart can tell us about our tendencies, where the house placement is, where the sign is, the aspects that Mercury is making. So, for example, if Mercury is aspecting Saturn, there might be a more serious, concentrated tone that can sometimes maybe be very diligent and focused and have a high capacity for output, but also maybe a bit um, critical of maybe self or others. And so those are things to look at. In contrast, Mercury in aspect to Jupiter, maybe there's a capacity for being very optimistic and hopeful and looking at the glass from the perspective of being half full, but there can also be a tendency to um, sugarcoat things or overdo it or um, not want to look at maybe some of um, the more practical and realistic scenarios. So those are just some examples. So that might be something to look at. I think that also a Mercury return can be a time where we look at if we want to have any kind of accommodations to how we take in information. We want to do things to make it more easy for us to learn, to share, whether that is making simple changes like taking in information via audio versus books, or um, taking a course in something that you want to understand more completely, etc., etc. Okay, and the solar return is your birthday. And this is something that we look at more often because our culture is based very much on the seasons, and human life is so impacted by the seasonal calendar, the annual calendar, and the sun reflects this. And the sun is also connected into our sense of vitality and self expression. And so we track this cycle, we track this annual cycle, and um, many astrologers will even read the solar return, the birthday chart, as an imprint of the energy for that entire birth year. So let's say your birthday is in June. We would look at the moment of your birth, that the moment that the sun returns to the exact degree and minute to where your sun was, and then take a chart for that from that June of 2025 and say that that chart represents the energy that is here for you from June of 2025 to June of 2026. Now, we could do that with any planet. We could do that with Saturn, with Jupiter, with Mars, with Venus, with Mercury. We could take the return chart of that moment and then say that that represents the energy of that entire circle, that entire cycle until the next return. And that's up to you if that's something that you want to experiment with. But I wanted to emphasize that because there are so many ways of looking at the astrology and reading the astrology, and we're constantly running these different cycles. And depending on what we want to know about, what's happening in our life, what we're curious about, we may want to look at different things. And there's really this unending potential of what we can look at and analyze and assess. Now, particularly if you are learning astrology and you're wanting to track some of the cycles, looking at the lunar return can be really interesting because it happens once a month. So the lunar return would be when the transiting moon comes back to the place that it was when you were born, so the sign that it was when you were born. And a really great resource for doing this. So, of course, there's astrology software that does this, but if you're learning and you want something that's maybe a bit more accessible, I really like the We Moon um, date book. So it's we, W-E apostrophe moon, and I'll put a link to it in this video. There's so many different astrology calendars out there, but I like this one because it's fairly simple. It has the glyphs and it tells you when there are planetary aspects, and it also tells you when the moon is changing from one sign to another. And so that might be something interesting to just begin to track where things are and to just track what's happening with the moon, I think is one of the most accessible places to start. Okay. Um, so do I want to share? So yeah, I'm curious what comes up for you around this, if there are questions, thoughts, ideas. And again, I want to return to this idea of looking at planetary returns as anniversaries and also as a simultaneous ending and beginning, and that we're constantly running so many different cycles at any one time. And depending on what aspects are happening, some of the cycles are going to feel more alive and present and here and visceral, and some are going to be more in the background. And it just really depends on where we are within the cycle, what transits are happening. And by looking at the initial point of a cycle, we can start to understand what's happening now. And I think that is one of the beauties of astrology, is it helps us figure out what is happening, get a sense for it, get a feel into it. Um, yeah. And as I reflect on this upcoming anniversary, also just thinking about how, uh, yeah, that astrology is really what led me to become a psychotherapist, and how special that feels, and how now at this point I'm feeling some upcoming projects coming in, some books that want to be written, and um, I feel that's sort of where I'm at now in the context of this broader arc, and I'm really excited to continue to build on and elaborate on the time that has passed thus far. And such an honor to share this with you. Such an honor to be here with you through all of the different cycles. And yeah, I hope that you will take some of this and maybe contemplate some of the returns that you've had or the anniversaries of important things that have happened to you. Um, this does not even have to be astrological. We can look at events of when things happened and when there was a pivotal marker in our life and what that meant to us, and the the energy there and how that carries us forward, and it's something that we connect back into. I think this is also this important events in our life have this imprint that we carry with us, and that we get to over our lifetimes continue to digest and process, emotionally digest and process the experiences that we've been through, the ones that are lovely and that we celebrate, and also the ones that are more challenging. And ideally, the more that we do this, the more that we process and contemplate our experiences, the greater sense of cohesion and the greater sense of sureness within ourselves we can connect to. Okay, that is what I have to say for today. I hope you enjoyed this. I am wishing you a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.